Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also tell us in the comments where are you watching from. New York, London, maybe South Africa, or Jamaica. We want to know. Kwame Asante's shoes cost more than most men in Enugu earned in a month. They were handmade. Italian leather, dark brown with a subtle burgundy undertone that only revealed itself in direct sunlight. He had bought them in London 7 years ago, during a conference on infrastructure development, and he wore them with the same quiet deliberateness with which he wore everything else. His pressed gray trousers, his cream-colored linen shirt with the sleeves rolled precisely twice above the wrist, his silver wristwatch that was heavy without being loud. Kwame Asante, 61 years old, was a man who had long ago learned that the loudest thing in any room did not have to be the person. It could be the posture, the silence, the way a man occupied space without needing to fill it with words. His office was on the 3rd floor of a modest building on Independence Layout, which was not the most prestigious address in Enugu, but was precisely the one he had chosen 22 years ago, when he first established his engineering consultancy in this city that had become, without his quite deciding it, his permanent home. The office had 2 large windows that faced east, and in the mornings the light came through them at a low angle and fell across the drafting table where he still drew by hand sometimes, even though the younger engineers in his firm used computer programs that could model an entire bridge in 3 dimensions. There was a framed photograph on the wall behind his desk, not of family, not of any person at all, but of the Akosombo Dam in Ghana, taken from the air, the great concrete arc holding back an impossible weight of water. He had put it there when he moved in and had never moved it. When people asked him why, he said it was because it reminded him what engineering was for. He never said what else it reminded him of. The consultancy was doing well, better than well. 3 active contracts with the state government, 1 with a federal agency, and a smaller private commission for a family in Abuja who wanted a guest house designed on a hillside. He had 12 employees, all of them competent, 3 of them genuinely gifted. He paid fairly, arrived early, and left late. He was respected in the way that men who keep their word tend to be respected, quietly, durably, without fanfare. His neighbors knew his name. His clients called him before they called anyone else. He had no wife. This was not for lack of opportunity. He was not an unpleasant-looking man, broad-shouldered still, though the years had softened the edges, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had settled into itself in a way that some people found trustworthy on sight. Women had been interested over the years, some for the obvious reasons, some for less obvious ones. He had always, at a certain point in every relationship, gone still. Not cold, not cruel, simply still. Like a river that narrows and deepens without warning, the surface calm, but the current underneath moving toward something no one could quite see. He lived alone in a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in GRA, the government-reserved area, where the trees were older and the roads were better. He had a housekeeper who came 3 times a week, a gardener who came once. He cooked for himself on Sundays, rice and groundnut soup always. The dish his mother had made in Accra on Sundays when he was a boy, the smell of it so embedded in his cellular memory that even thinking about it could make him feel, briefly, the particular ache of a thing that is gone and cannot be recovered. He ate at the table. He washed his own bowl. He went to bed at 10 and woke at 5:15. He was 61 years old. He had not spoken to anyone in Ghana in 11 years. The void had a specific shape. It was not the vague loneliness of a man who had simply never found the right person. It was the shape of a specific absence, one he had constructed himself, brick by careful brick, beginning 30 years ago when he was 31, and had made a decision that he had never fully examined and never allowed himself to fully regret. Because full regret, he had come to understand, was the kind of thing that could unmake a man entirely if he let it in all at once. He thought of it as a door he had closed. The door had a weight to it. Some mornings, usually in the weeks when work was slow and the house was quiet, he was aware of that weight more than others. He had never opened the door. He had learned over 30 years how to live in the rooms on the other side of it. He was good at living in those rooms. Until the evening of a Tuesday in March, when his neighbor Amara Obi knocked on his gate at 7:30 with a look on her face that he had never seen before, a look that was not quite alarm and not quite grief, but something that combined elements of both, and said, "Kwame, I need you to come. I found someone." He followed Amara in his car. She had asked him to bring his, and something in her tone had told him not to ask why. He followed her taillights through the darkening streets of Gra, out past the roundabout, out past the petrol station, with the broken sign that had been broken for as long as he had lived in this city, out onto the road that headed south toward the Enugu-Onitsha Expressway, and it was only when they turned off before the expressway onto the smaller feeder road, the one that was barely more than a track through dry grass and occasional acacia trees, that he began to understand the general shape of what they were going toward. He had driven this road before. He remembered the darkness of it. No streetlights, no houses for long stretches. The sense of the land being empty and indifferent on both sides of the car. He remembered thinking briefly that this was the kind of road where things happened that nobody saw. And then, as Amara's car slowed and stopped, he saw her. She was sitting on the roadside, about 2 meters from the tarmac edge on the dry red earth, her back straight in a way that looked less like pride and more like what is left when a person has used up everything else. She was wearing a wrapper of faded yellow and green and a light blouse, and her feet were in flat sandals that had seen better years. Beside her was a bag, the kind with rigid sides and a broken zipper repaired with a length of wire, the kind that had been many colors in its time and was now the general color of long use. She was not crying. She was not looking at the road. She was looking at a fixed point in the darkness across the road that contained, as far as Kwame could tell, nothing at all. She was 74 years old. Amara had found her an hour earlier. She had been driving back from her sister's house and had seen this woman sitting at the side of the road with her bag, perfectly still, in the way that only the very young or the very old can sit perfectly still, with a completeness to it, a lack of fidgeting that the middle years never quite recover. Amara had stopped. She had asked. The woman had said in Igbo that she was waiting. For what? Amara had asked. For I don't know, the woman had said. And there had been something in the way she said it. Not despair, not resignation, but something colder and quieter than either, that had made Amara call Kwame instead of any of the other people she might have called. Kwame got out of his car. He walked toward her slowly, the way you walk toward something fragile or something that might bolt. The night air had that particular quality it gets in March in Enugu, dry and cooling fast, with a wind coming from the north that carried dust and the faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere distant. He stopped a few steps away from her and crouched down so that his eyes were level with hers. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. They were dark and deep-set and very steady. There were lines in her face that told a story in the way that only a face that has lived fully and suffered specifically can. Not the general soft blurring of age, but lines that had been carved by particular things, particular years, particular griefs. She had high cheekbones, and her hair was white and pulled back, and she wore no jewelry except for small gold studs in her ears that might have been the same ones she'd worn for 40 years. She said nothing. He said in Igbo, "My name is Kwame. I am your neighbor, more or less. I live nearby. My friend Amara found you here, and she asked me to come because she didn't want to leave you alone. We would like to take you somewhere warm. You don't have to tell me anything. You don't have to explain anything. But I would like to take you somewhere warm." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I have nowhere to go." He said, "You can come to my house." She said, "You don't know me." He said, "That's true." Another long silence. She looked down at the bag beside her. She looked at her hands in her lap, small hands, strong-knuckled, the hands of someone who had spent decades doing work that required grip and patience. Then she looked back at him with those steady dark eyes and said something that he would think about many times in the weeks that followed, something that lodged in him like a splinter that doesn't hurt until you press on it. She said, "My children left me here. My children left." 3 words for each of them, simple, declarative, with no particular inflection of outrage or self-pity, as if she were reporting a weather event. The sky is gray. The road is long. My children left me here. He felt something move in his chest. He did not know, in that moment, why it moved quite so decisively. He said, "Let me carry your bag." She let him. In the car, driving back through the dark, he remembered, without meaning to, without inviting it, a road in Ghana 30 years ago. A different night, a different woman standing in a different kind of stillness. He pushed the memory away with the practiced ease of someone who has done it many times, but it left a residue, the way memories always do when they come unbidden. A faint warmth in the chest, followed by a sharper feeling that was its opposite. He drove. Amara followed behind. He did not know, sitting in that car, that the woman in the passenger seat had been carrying a secret for 30 years. He did not know that the secret was about him. She stayed one night, then two. Amara came every day for the first week and sat with her and fed her and asked nothing. Kwame's housekeeper, a large, efficient woman named Blessing, who treated extraordinary circumstances with ordinary practicality, simply began cooking for two without being asked. The small guest room at the back of the house was converted into a bedroom with a quiet competence that Kwame found both moving and slightly alarming. The woman's name was Adeza Nwosu. She told him this on the third day at breakfast, as if it were a decision she had taken some time to arrive at. She told him more over subsequent days, in the careful, unhurried way of someone who has been through enough to know that truth can be released in measured doses without losing its power. She told him about the house in Enugu that had been her home for 40 years, the house where her late husband Emeka had brought her as a young bride, the house where she had cooked 10,000 meals and mended 10,000 things and raised 3 children who had, between them, accumulated 4 university degrees, 2 houses, 3 cars, and a mother they no longer knew what to do with. She told him about Emeka's death 12 years ago, a heart attack in a hospital without resources, and the years after, the slow exclusion from the house that had once been hers, the son-in-law she had never liked, the daughter-in-law who had made clear in 100 tiny ways that Adaizi's presence in the house was a burden, not a blessing. She told him about the night they put her in the car, Chukwuemeka, her eldest, 46 years old, the one she had carried to the hospital on her back when he was 3 and had a fever that didn't break for 2 days. He had come to her room that evening and told her, with the particular efficiency of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say many times, that it was no longer working, that the house was too small, that his wife needed more space, that they had found a place for her to go, an elder care facility in Port Harcourt that had a good reputation, apparently, though he pronounced the name of it with the slight uncertainty of someone who had only read it and never visited. She had asked to see the place. He had said there wasn't time. She had asked why. He had said the arrangement had been made. She had asked who made the arrangement. He had said not to worry about it. And something in his eyes, something she had seen once before, when he was 12 years old and had broken a neighbor's window and lied about it to her face. Something in his eyes had told her that Port Harcourt was not a plan, but a story, and the real plan was the road. Ngozi, her daughter, had come to sit with her while Adaizi packed. Ngozi had cried. She had held her mother's hand and cried and said nothing useful and done nothing at all, which was, Adaizi had decided in that moment, the most devastating thing of all. Not the cruelty of her eldest, but the uselessness of her middle child's grief. The way Ngozi had turned her own guilt into a performance that required Adaizi to comfort her while being discarded. And Tobechukwu, the youngest, the one she had loved with a particular ferocity, the way mothers sometimes love the last one, the one who came when they were already tired, the one whose very existence felt like a grace. Tobechukwu had driven the car. He had not looked at her in the rearview mirror once. She had waited for it the whole drive, the mirror check, the flicker of connection, the moment where her baby looked at her and became her baby again. It had not come. He had stopped the car. He had put her bag on the road. He had driven away. She told this to Kwame quietly, at breakfast on a Tuesday morning, holding her cup of tea in both hands. He listened. He did not say anything for a long time. He looked out the window at his garden, where a bird he could not name was doing something complicated in the branches of a neem tree. Then he said, "How long ago was this?" She said, 11 days. He said, "You sat on that road for 11 days?" She said, "No, 3 days. Then Amara found me." He said, "Where did you go the first 3 days?" She said, "I walked to a church. They let me sleep in the hall. Then they needed the hall for a meeting, and I went back to the road. I didn't want to ask for more than I had already been given." He looked at her then, looked at her fully, in the way he did not often look at people, with the kind of attention that is also a form of respect, that says, "I see you, and what I see is worth seeing." He said, "You don't have to leave here until you want to." She said, "I haven't told you everything." He said, "You don't have to tell me anything." She said, "No, I mean, there is something specific that I have not told you, something that concerns you." He went very still. She looked at him steadily. Those quiet dark eyes. She said, "I need a little more time before I tell you. I need to be sure it is the right thing." He said, "Take the time." He picked up his cup. He drank his tea. He looked at the bird in the neem tree. He did not know, in that moment, that the thing she was not yet ready to tell him was the thing that was going to change his life entirely. Ngozi Nwosu arrived on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the night on the road. She came alone, which surprised Kwame. He had half expected the brother, Chukwuemeka, whose name Adaeze spoke with the controlled flatness of someone who has decided not to give a word more power than it deserves. But it was Ngozi who appeared at his gate at 9 in the morning, a woman of 42 in a good dress that was slightly wrong for the hour, wearing heels on a street that was not meant for heels, with a handbag that was deliberately expensive in a way that said less about wealth and more about the need to be seen as having it. She had found the address through a neighbor of a neighbor. She wanted to see her mother. Kwame opened the gate. He watched her walk into his house with the specific wariness of a man who has not yet decided whether someone is a guest or a problem. Adaeze was in the small courtyard at the back of the house, sitting in the plastic chair she had claimed as hers, shelling groundnuts with the methodical rhythm of someone who needs to keep her hands busy. She looked up when Ngozi came through the back door, and her face did something complicated. Not softening exactly, but opening and then closing again in quick succession, like a door blown briefly by wind that someone immediately pushes shut. Ngozi said, "Mama." Adaeze said, "You came." Ngozi said, "I came to bring you home." There was a silence. Adaeze set the bowl of groundnuts on the ground beside her chair. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at her daughter with the careful attention of someone examining something they have looked at many times and are now, finally, seeing clearly. She said, "What home?" Ngozi's face crumpled. Then she recovered. She said, "Chukwuemeka, I know what he did was wrong. I know I should have stopped it. I've been trying to talk to him. He says he's sorry. He wants you to come back." Adaeze said, "What does his wife say?" Ngozi opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Adaeze said, "That is what I thought." Ngozi sat down. She looked around the space, the neem tree, the bird that was always there, the modest order of it, the plainness. She said, "Mama, you can't stay here. You don't even know this man." Adaeze said, "I know him better than you might think." Ngozi looked at her sharply. "What does that mean?" Adaeze said, "It means that knowing someone is not only a matter of years." Ngozi leaned forward. "Mama, Chukwuemeka is talking to a lawyer about the house. He wants to make sure everything is organized properly, the title, the deed, all of it." Adaeze's eyes went very still. "A lawyer," she said. "Yes, he says Papa's will was complicated, that there may be issues with the title, that it should all be put properly in order." "Properly in order," Adaeze repeated. Each word landed separately, like stones dropped into water. "Yes," Ngozi said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone repeating something they have been told to say and are beginning, only now, to hear what it actually means. Adaeze picked up the bowl of groundnuts. She resumed shelling. She said, "You should go back to your brother Ngozi. Tell him I am well. Tell him I am being cared for. Tell him not to worry about the house." "But Mama." "Tell him not to worry about the house," Adaeze said again, quietly, precisely, with the tone of someone who has made a decision so long ago that it is no longer a decision but simply a fact. "Everything that belongs to that house is already properly in order. It has been for 22 years. Ngozi stared at her. "What does that mean?" Adaeze looked up from the groundnuts and met her daughter's eyes. She said, "It means that your brother should consult his lawyer before he goes any further. And when he has done that, and when he has understood what he will find, you are all welcome to come and talk to me here, with respect, with your shoes off at the door, the way I raised you to enter a house that is not yours." Ngozi stood up. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Are you angry with us?" Adaeze looked at her daughter for a long time. There was something in her face. Not the anger Ngozi was asking about, not bitterness, not even grief. Something more still and more final than any of those. Something that looked like the quiet on the other side of the storm. She said, "I finished being angry a long time ago, Ngozi. Anger takes energy. I needed that energy for other things." Ngozi left. Kwame, who had been in the doorway of the kitchen hearing all of this without meaning to, stepped aside to let her pass. She paused in front of him. She said she knows you, better than I think. What did she mean by that? He said, "I don't know." It was, in that moment, the truth. It did not stay the truth for long. The next day, he found Ngozi in his sala. He had not heard her come in. The front door had been unlocked, as it usually was in daylight hours. She was standing at the small writing table near the window, holding an envelope. An old envelope, yellowed at the edges, with the distinctive crinkle of paper that has been folded and unfolded many times over many years. He said, "What are you doing?" She spun around. The envelope was in her hand. She said, "I'm sorry. I came back to apologize to my mother. She was in the courtyard, and I was looking for paper to write her a note, and I opened the drawer and I saw—" She stopped. She held the envelope toward him with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "What is this?" He crossed the room in 3 steps and took it from her. He knew what it was before he looked at it. He knew from the weight of it in his palm. He knew from the slight roughness of the paper, the texture of it against his fingers. He knew because his hands remembered writing it, 30 years ago, on a night when he had decided to be the kind of man who explained himself, and then, at the last moment, had decided to be the kind of man who disappeared instead. The name on the envelope was Afua, just that, written in his own handwriting, his younger handwriting, more angular than the script he wrote with now, with the particular care of someone writing a name that matters very much. He said nothing. Ngozi said, quietly, "Who is Afua?" The word fell in the room like something dropped from a height. There was the impact and then the silence after. He said, "You should go." She said, "My mother said she knows you better than I think. She said something is properly in order that has been in order for 22 years. And I come here and I find a letter addressed to a woman named Afua in your drawer. Who is she?" He said, "Ngozi. My mother worked for years as a translator for a humanitarian organization. She speaks 4 languages. She traveled to different places. She knew people across West Africa." Ngozi's voice was very careful now, very controlled, like someone building something that might fall over if they go too fast. "Is there something about you that my mother knows? Something you haven't told anyone here?" He sat down. He sat down heavily, the way a man sits when he has been standing a very long time. He said, "Your mother knew about Afua?" Ngozi said nothing. He looked at the envelope in his hands. The letter he had never sent. The weight of it. Physical weight, almost nothing. 2 sheets of paper, 30 years old. But the other weight. The weight it had in his chest, like the Akosombo Dam's worth of something held back. He said, "Yes, there is something. And I think it is time that it stops being something only I know about." He put the envelope down on the table. He told her to call her mother. Adaeze came inside. She sat across from him at the kitchen table. Ngozi sat beside her, very still, watching her mother's face. Kwame put a cup of tea in front of each of them and sat down himself. And then, for the first time in 30 years, he opened the door. He said, "Her name is Efua Mensah. I met her in Accra in 1993. I was 29. She was 26. I had just finished my engineering degree at Kwame Nkrumah University, and I had been hired by a civil engineering firm in Lagos to do survey work on a road project. The project took me through Accra, and I stayed longer than I planned. I met Efua at a church fundraiser. She was helping to organize it, carrying chairs, directing people, laughing at something one of the other women said. She had the kind of laugh that made other people laugh without knowing why. I introduced myself. She told me her name and then immediately told me 3 things about the fundraiser that still needed doing. I helped with all 3. He paused. He looked at his hands on the table. We were together for 8 months. I won't pretend that I behaved perfectly during those months. I was 29. I was in a new city. I told myself that what we had was real, and in many ways it was. It was the realest thing I'd had up to that point. But I also told myself, at the same time, that it was temporary, that my life was somewhere else, that the job in Lagos was the beginning of something that required me to be unencumbered. I told myself these 2 contradictory things and found a way to live in both of them at once, the way you can when you are 29 and the distance between intentions and consequences still feels large enough to live in. He picked up his cup, he drank, he set it down. When the road project ended, I was offered a new posting. Not Lagos, Enugu. A different country, a different project, different terms. I told Efua I was going. I said I would write. I said we would figure it out. She said, "Kwame, I need to tell you something first." And I said, "God forgive me." I said, "Tell me when I get there." Meaning, tell me when I come back to Accra, as if I were only going away for a week and would return on a Friday. He stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the neem tree moved in a small wind. I did not come back. The posting in Enugu led to another, and another. And I was good at what I did, better than I'd thought I'd be. And the work kept finding me. And the months became a year, and the year became 3 years. And by then I had told myself, in the way you tell yourself things that you know are not true, that Efua had moved on, that she was fine, that whatever she had needed to tell me was a small thing, a relationship conversation, something that would have complicated an already complicated departure. I had told myself this for so long that I had almost stopped hearing it as a lie. He looked at a daze. "You said, that first day at breakfast, that there was something you hadn't told me, something that concerned me." She said, "Yes." He said, "You knew about Efua." She said, "I knew about Efua, and I knew about Kofi." The name landed in the room like something thrown. Kofi. Ngozi made a small sound. Not a word. Just a sound. Kwame said, "What is Kofi?" A daze set down her cup. She folded her hands. She looked at him with those still, dark eyes that he had come to understand held more information than most faces he had ever looked at. She said, "Kofi is your son." He did not move. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The length of time it takes for a very large thing to fall from a very great height. She said, "His full name is Kofi Efua Mensah. He is 29 years old. He was born in March of 1996. He was born 8 months after you left Accra." She spoke carefully, the way she shelled groundnuts, methodically, without rushing, each piece placed. What Efua had needed to tell you before you left was that she was pregnant. She was 3 months along. She was going to tell you that night, and you told her to tell you when you got there. The silence in the room was absolute. "She tried to find you. For 2 years she tried. She had the name of the firm in Lagos, but you had never gone to Lagos, not long term, and the firm's records were disorganized. She had an address in Enugu that turned out to be for a project office that had since closed. She had your mother's address in Accra, and she wrote there, twice. She did not know whether the letters were received. Kwame's lips parted. He said, "I was not in contact with my mother during those years." Daisy said, "I know." After the second letter went unanswered, Efua understood that she was alone. She was a strong woman. She raised Kofi by herself. Her mother helped for the first years until her mother passed. She worked in a small accounting firm. She told Kofi about you when he was 9 years old. She showed him the one photograph she had of the two of you, taken at a festival. She told him your name. She told him you were an engineer. She told him you had not known about him. And Kofi? The word came out of him rough and strange. Kofi is 29 years old. He is a photographer. He has been searching for you for 3 years. Since he was 26, since Efua passed away. Daisy paused. His mother died 2 years ago. Cancer. Before she died, she gave him everything she had kept. The photograph. The address of the engineering firm in Lagos, crossed out. Notes she had made over the years of the search. Everything she could give him. Ngozi reached across and put her hand on her mother's arm, not to stop her, just to be touching something. He found records of a K. Asante registered with the Nigerian Engineering Council. He found the address of your firm here in Enugu. He arrived in this city 2 months ago. Adaze looked at him steadily. He has been here for 2 months. He found your address. He has walked past your gate 3 times. Kwame looked at her. He said, "How do you know this?" She said, "Because I found the letter, the one you never sent. I was cleaning. I clean when I need to do something with my hands, when the stillness becomes too much, and I opened that drawer looking for scissors, and I found the envelope with Efua's name on it. I could read it because it is written partly in Twi, and I know Twi. I worked for 20 years as a translator for a humanitarian organization. I have translated in Twi, in Hausa, in Igbo, in Yoruba. I read the letter, and the letter told me things about you that explained what I had suspected." He said, "You suspected." She said, "I am 74 years old. I have raised children, buried a husband, worked alongside people in 10 countries. I know a man who is carrying something the way I know the smell of rain coming before the rain. You have been carrying this for 30 years. I saw it in the first week." He was quiet. Ngozi was very still. "After I read the letter," Adaze continued, "I made inquiries. I have contacts, old contacts, from the humanitarian work, from the organizations I worked with over the years. I asked carefully. I found Kofi. I made contact. I told him who I was. I told him that I had reason to believe his father was in Enugu. I told him that I would not speak for his father, that this was not my story to tell, but I told him that there was a door in this city, and that if he chose to knock on it, the person on the other side was the kind of man who does not hide from his own history when it stands before him." She looked at Kwame. "Am I wrong?" she said. He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them. He thought about a woman in Accra with a laugh that made other people laugh, and he thought about everything that had followed, and he thought about the letter he had written and sealed and held and never sent, and he thought about 30 years of rooms on the other side of a closed door, and about the void he had thought he had learned to live inside. He thought about all of it at once, and something in his chest that had been held very tightly for a very long time shifted in a way that had no name, but that he felt all the way to his hands. He said, "Where is he now?" Adaze said, "I will call him." She reached into the pocket of her wrapper and took out her phone, small, older model, the phone of someone who treats a phone as a tool and not a companion, and she dialed a number she clearly knew by heart. She held the phone to her ear. She waited. She said into the phone, "Kofi, it is Adaze. Are you available? You should come now. Yes, to this address. Yes, now. He is ready." She ended the call. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked at Kwame. She said, "He will be here in 20 minutes. He is waiting at a coffee shop 2 streets away. He has been waiting there most mornings for 2 weeks, just in case." The silence after this had a particular quality, the silence of something that has been held very tightly and very long, that is, right now, at this exact moment, being let go. Ngozi was crying silently. She was not making a production of it. The tears were simply there on her face, falling because the body sometimes does what the mind is too full to prevent. She was looking at her mother with an expression that was beginning, very slowly, to understand something about the woman sitting across from her. Something she realized, in this moment, that she had never fully understood before. Adais sat quietly. She folded her hands. She looked at Kwame. He said, "Why? Why did you do this? You didn't owe me anything. You didn't owe him anything." She said, "I know what it is to raise a child alone. I know what it costs. Afua paid that cost for 29 years. The least her son deserves is the answer to the question she could not get him before she died." She paused. "And I know what it is to carry a secret until it becomes heavier than you are. You have been carrying this since before I was put on that road. It was time for someone to help you put it down." He looked at her for a very long time. He said, "You are a remarkable woman, Adais." She said, "I am a tired woman, but tired is not the same as finished." 22 minutes later, there was a knock at the gate. Kwame stood up from the table. He walked to the front door. He opened it. He walked across the small yard to the gate. He put his hand on the latch. He stopped there for a moment, just a moment. The weight of 30 years on one side of a gate. He opened it. The young man standing on the other side was 29 years old. He was lean, medium height, with a camera bag over one shoulder, and the careful stillness of someone who has been preparing for something for a very long time, and is now standing here, discovering that preparation is not the same as readiness. He had close-cropped hair. He wore a plain dark shirt and jeans. His eyes were dark and wide-set and very steady. They were Kwame's eyes. The shape of them, the width of them, the particular steadiness of them, that quality Kwame had always thought of as simply his own way of looking at the world, specific to him, formed by him, belonging to no one else. He was looking at his own eyes in a younger face. His mouth opened. No words came. The young man said, in a voice that was very quiet and very controlled, "My name is Kofi Mensah. My mother was Efua Mensah. She told me you are an engineer. She told me your name is Kwame. She told me—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. His jaw worked. He tried again. "She told me you didn't know about me. She wanted me to find you. She wanted me to—" He stopped again. His hand came up and covered his mouth. His eyes did not fill with tears. They simply became very bright, very suddenly, the way a window becomes bright when light hits it. Kwame took one step forward. He said, "Come inside." 3 days passed. In those 3 days, Kwame and Kofi sat in the kitchen, in the courtyard, in the sala, talking in the way that people talk when they have a lifetime to cover and are not sure where to start, which is to say they started in the middle and worked outward in all directions at once, filling in edges and centers in an order that had nothing to do with chronology and everything to do with what was possible to say at any given moment. Kofi showed him photographs, his photographs, the work he did, the images that had made him a living for 6 years, street scenes in Accra, documentary work in Kumasi, a series on Enugu markets that he had been shooting since he arrived. He also showed him the photograph of his parents together, the one Efua had kept, the festival photograph. Kwame standing beside a young woman who was laughing with her whole face. Both of them caught in a moment of a life that had been real and had been left. Kwame held the photograph for a long time. He handed it back. He said, "She was the way I told you. She had a laugh that made other people laugh." Kofi said, "I know. I grew up inside it." There was a pause. Kofi said, "I'm not here because I want something from you. I want to be clear about that. I didn't come to Enugu to find a father exactly. I came because she asked me to. She said, 'Find him and tell him you exist.' She said she didn't want you to die not knowing. She wasn't angry. When she talked about you, she was complete. She was a complete person who happened to have a story that included something painful, and she had found a way to hold it without being defined by it. She was like that with everything." Kwame said, "She was like that when I knew her." Kofi nodded. Kwame said, "I need to say something. I need to say it once, clearly, and then we can decide what to do with it." He folded his hands on the table. He looked at his son. "What I did, leaving the way I left, not going back, not searching. I have told myself many things about it over the years, that I didn't know, that I couldn't have known. that if she had told me, I would have acted differently. And some of those things are true, but not all of them. And the part that isn't true, I won't ask you to absolve me of it. That is not what this conversation is for. I am just telling you that I know the difference between what was beyond me and what I chose. And I am sorry, not to satisfy a script, but because I am. Kofi looked at him. He said, "She knew the difference too. She said so." They sat with that for a moment. Then Kofi said, "So, what do we do now?" Kwame said, "I don't know, but I'm not going anywhere." It was during these days that Adaize told Kwame the rest of what she knew. Not about Kofi, about Chukwuemeka. She told him in the early morning before the city was fully awake, when the light was still blue and the air still had the cool of the night in it. She was sitting in her courtyard chair and she told him what she had understood from Ngozi's visit. The lawyer, the title, the house. She said, "My husband, Emeka, made a will. I watched him make it. We were both in the room, me and two witnesses, our neighbor Mr. Ease, and a man from Emeka's church, a deacon named Bartholomew. The will was handwritten by a lawyer in town, a man named Okoro, who has since retired. In the will, Emeka left the family house and all associated property, not to the children individually, but in trust for the establishment of a school for children in the community who cannot afford school fees. He had wanted to do this his whole life. His own schooling had been paid for by a church fund started by a stranger, and he never forgot it. He named me as sole executor. Kwame said, "Your children knew about this?" She said, "They knew about one copy. There were two, the original and a certified copy. The certified copy was kept in the house. 9 years ago, Chukwuemeka found it. He told me it was old, that it was probably not legally valid, that Emeka had never updated it, and things had changed. He had it taken away, saying he would consult a lawyer. He never told me the outcome of that consultation. The copy disappeared. I was already not at my sharpest then. Emeka had been gone for 3 years, and I was still finding my way back to myself." She opened her wrapper slightly, and from somewhere inside it, from the place where women of a certain generation keep the things that cannot be left unguarded, she drew out an envelope. Not old, this one. Carefully preserved, the edges clean, the paper firm. She placed it on the space between them. She said, "The original was never in the house. I kept it with a woman I trusted, a woman from my church, Sister Blessing, who is 90 years old and lives in a small room in Ogwi, and has kept this envelope under her mattress for 22 years because I asked her to. And she is not the kind of woman who asks why when a friend asks for this kind of help." Kwame looked at the envelope. She said, "Inside this envelope is the original will, handwritten by lawyer Okoro, signed by Emeka in the presence of Mr. Easy and Deacon Bartholomew. I retrieved it from Sister Blessing before Ngozi's visit. I have had it in my wrapper since." Kwame said, "Does it hold legally?" She said, "Lawyer Okoro retired, but he lives in a Chara layout. I have his address. A handwritten will with 2 witnesses, properly signed and dated, is valid under Nigerian succession law. Chukwuemeka's lawyer will know this the moment he sees it." He looked at her. He said, "You planned this?" She said, "I have been planning this for 9 years. Since the day Chukwuemeka took the certified copy and said he would consult a lawyer. I knew from the look on his face what consulting a lawyer meant." She folded her hands. "I am 74 years old. My children left me on a road. I am not angry, but I have not forgotten what belongs to the children of this community, the children my husband wanted to remember. And I will not leave this earth without making sure they get it." He said, "What do you need?" She said, "I need a lawyer who is not afraid of Chukwuemeka's money." He said, "I know one." His name was Philip Odom, and he had been Kwame's lawyer for 18 years, since the early days of the firm, when contracts needed reviewing and disputes needed a steady hand. Philip was 55 years old, built like a man who had played rugby once and kept the posture if not the fitness. And he practiced from a small office in New Haven, with the specific confidence of a man who has won enough cases that he no longer needs to perform confidence. It simply resided in him, like furniture that has been in a room so long it is part of the room. Kwame called him that evening. He explained the situation. Philip listened without interrupting, the full attentive silence of a man who needs to hear everything before he speaks. When Kwame finished, Philip said, "A handwritten will with 2 witnesses, properly executed, surviving original never filed or challenged. That is solid, very solid. You say the witnesses are alive?" Kwame said, "Mr. Ease has passed, but Deacon Bartholomew is in Enugu. He is 72. Philip said, "1 witness is enough to provide corroborating testimony. We can also get lawyer Okoro's statement that he drafted the document. This is a sound case, Kwame. Who is the opposing party?" Kwame said, "Her son, Chukwuemeka Nwosu. He owns a trading business. He has money and connections." Philip said, "Does he have a copy of the will?" Kwame said, "He destroyed the certified copy 9 years ago." A pause. Philip said, "Then he is about to have a very difficult Tuesday, or whatever day we choose." They agreed to meet 2 days later. Kwame, Adaize, Philip, and Kofi, who Kwame asked to be present not because it was legally necessary, but because in some way he could not fully articulate. It seemed important for the people who had come to stand beside him to stand together. But Chukwuemeka moved first. He arrived at Kwame's house 2 days before the lawyer meeting, at 11 in the morning, with a different lawyer at his side. A young, thin man in a suit that was too large for him, carrying a briefcase with the uncomfortable conscientiousness of someone performing confidence he does not quite feel. Chukwuemeka was 46, tall like Adaize, but with a heaviness to him that was not just physical, a weight about the eyes, a set to the jaw, the look of a man who has been telling himself for a long time that what he wants is the same as what is right. He stood at the gate and said that he wanted to see his mother. Kwame opened the gate. Chukwuemeka walked in with the slightly challenging step of a man on ground he wants to claim. He found Adaize in the courtyard. He sat down across from her, uninvited, and placed his hands on his knees in a way that was meant to look casual, and looked instead like someone trying to keep their hands still. He said, "Mama, I came to bring you home." She said, "Your sister said the same thing." He said, "Ngozi is emotional. I'm being practical. The house needs to be properly sorted. There are legal matters. The estate has never been formally settled and it's causing problems with the tax authorities and the local land registry." She said, "Is that so?" "Yes. I've retained a lawyer to help finalize everything. It's just paperwork, but it requires your cooperation. There are some documents that need your signature." The young lawyer opened his briefcase and placed a folder on the courtyard table. Adaize looked at the folder. She did not touch it. She said, "What documents?" Chukwuemeka said, "Mainly a transfer of title and an executor's release, standard estate administration documents. Nothing unusual." She said, "Transfer of title to whom?" He cleared his throat. "To the estate, formally, which would then be managed by the family." "By you," she said. "By the family," he repeated. She looked at him for a long time. Something in his face was not quite meeting her eyes. Not quite. The way a man who is lying will aim for the eyes and fall just short. She said, "Your father made a will, Chukwuemeka." He said, "Mama, that will was a draft. It was never finalized. It was never probated. It has no legal standing." She said, "A handwritten will with 2 witnesses has legal standing in Nigeria, Chukwuemeka, and your father's was properly executed." His jaw went tight. "The witnesses are dead." "One is dead," she said. "Deacon Bartholomew is alive. He is 72. He preaches every Sunday at Assemblies of God in Uwani. He remembers the night very well. He remembers what was in the document. He has said so in writing to a lawyer named Philip Odom." Something passed through Chukwuemeka's face. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Something that was the expression of a man who thought he was playing a game in a room with no one else in it, and has just discovered that the room is full. The young lawyer leaned toward his client and murmured something. Chukwuemeka said, "Where is this will?" She said, "Safe." He said, "Mama, I don't want to make this difficult, but if you are going to contest the legitimate administration of this estate, you should understand what that means. Legally, financially, and for the family. She said, I understand exactly what it means, my son. I have understood for 22 years. He stood up. He said, I will give you 2 days to reconsider. She said, I have already reconsidered everything that needed reconsidering. Take your folder. He left it on the table. He left. The young lawyer hurried after him, briefcase banging against his leg. Adaize sat in her chair. She looked at the folder on the table. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, steadily, without either fear or contempt. She said without turning, Kwame. He said, I'm here. She said, call Philip. The call came at 7 in the morning, 2 days later. It was Ngozi. She called Kwame's phone because she did not have her mother's number, and her voice was the voice of someone calling from the other side of something they have already crossed and cannot get back from. She said that Chukwuemeka had spoken to his lawyer the night before, and the lawyer had told him the same thing Philip Odom had told Adaize. The original will, properly executed with a living witness, was sound. He would not be able to contest it easily, possibly at all. So he had moved to a different terrain. Chukwuemeka had gone, that morning, to the office of the local Community Development Committee and filed a formal complaint claiming that Adaize was not mentally competent to manage her own affairs, that her advanced age, recent homelessness, and current residence in the house of a man she barely knew were evidence of vulnerability and possible exploitation. He was requesting that the committee appoint a family member, himself specifically, as her legal guardian. Ngozi said, He's going to the state welfare office next. He has a meeting at 10. Kwame said, When did you find out? She said, He told me last night. He was proud of it. He said it was the most practical solution. Her voice broke briefly and then recovered. I told him he was wrong. He said I was being sentimental. She paused. She said, I should have stopped this months ago. I should have stopped it the night we... She could not say the road. I should have stopped it. I didn't. That is something I have to carry. But I cannot let him do this. She is my mother. Kwame said, You are going to have to say that to someone today. In person, in a room with a decision maker. She said, I know. Tell me where to go. He called Philip. Philip said, Competency claims require medical assessment by a registered physician and a formal court hearing. This is not something the Community Development Committee has authority to decide. But if we get ahead of it, it loses all its power. We file the will for formal probate this morning, before his welfare meeting. Once the will is before the court, the estate is under legal protection, and he cannot take any unilateral action. And we bring Adaize to my office today with her documents, and we have Dr. Adeola do a brief mental capacity assessment, which she will pass without difficulty, which I will have in writing by this afternoon. By the time his welfare meeting starts, we will have already rendered it irrelevant. Kwame said, How long? Philip said, Give me 2 hours. He said, You have 1. He told Adaize. She was eating breakfast, the groundnut soup she had learned to make in this kitchen. She listened to everything he said. She did not change her expression much. She set down her spoon. She said, He is afraid. Kwame said, He is dangerous when he's afraid. She said, Afraid men always are. She picked up her spoon again. I am ready whenever you need me to be ready. Give me 10 minutes to get my envelope. Philip Odom's office. 2 in the afternoon. The room was modest and very organized, with bookshelves filled methodically and a desk that was clear except for the folders Philip was currently working with. 2 ceiling fans turning slowly. A window with the blind half drawn against the afternoon sun. The chairs were mismatched but not uncomfortable. They were 5 at the table. Kwame, Adaize, Kofi, Philip, and Ngozi, who had arrived looking like she had not slept and had dressed very carefully to compensate for it. On one side of the door, a court-appointed process server was waiting with the papers for filing. On the other side of the door, Chukwemeka was being asked by Philip's assistant to please wait in the reception area. He had come. Philip had called him with the professional neutrality of a man who has conducted this kind of conversation many times, and told him that his mother and her legal representative had something to discuss with him before any formal proceedings began, and that it was in everyone's interest to have this conversation privately before it became a matter of public record. Chukwemeka had come because he was the kind of man who, despite everything, still believed that the conversation could go his way if he was the most prepared person in the room. He came in. He saw Ngozi. His eyes went flat for a moment. He recovered. He sat down. He said, "Mama, I'm glad you're here." Adaeze said, "Sit down, Chukwemeka." He was already sitting. He straightened. Philip said, "Thank you for coming, Mr. Nwosu. As I mentioned, there are some estate matters that have been clarified in the last 24 hours that your mother and I wanted to share with you before any formal filings proceed." Chukwemeka said, "I've already discussed this with my own counsel." Philip said, "I understand. And I think once your counsel has seen what we have, the advice you receive may change." He opened a folder. The original will of Mr. Emeka Nwosu, executed on the 14th of June 2002, in the presence of Mr. Ease, now deceased, and Deacon Emmanuel Bartholomew, who is alive and has provided a signed affidavit confirming the contents and execution of this document. He turned the pages so they faced Chukwemeka. The will designates all property and assets of the Nwosu family estate for the establishment of a free community school in Enugu, with Mrs. Adaeze Nwosu as sole executor. Chukwemeka looked at the pages. He said, "This is a copy." Philip said, "It is the original. You may have it examined by any document authentication expert of your choosing. The ink is consistent with production in 2002. The paper stock is consistent with the period. Lawyer Okoro, who drafted this document, has provided a notarized statement confirming that he drafted and witnessed the execution of this will on the date indicated." Chukwemeka looked at his mother. "Where was this?" She said, "Safe." He said, "For 22 years." She said, "For 22 years." A silence. He said, "You kept it from us." She said, "I kept it safe from people who had already destroyed one copy." His face went through something. Anger first, then calculation, then a third thing that was harder to name, something that looked almost like the early stages of being lost. He said, "This is the legal requirement for probate, the timeline. There are." Philip said, "There is no timeline violation. Nigerian succession law allows for probate filing at any point while the estate remains unsettled, which this estate is, since no valid will has ever been submitted. I am filing this document for probate this afternoon." He closed the folder. "Mr. Nwosu, I want to be very clear about something. The competency complaint you filed this morning with the Community Development Committee is procedurally without merit. Such determinations require magistrate court order and medical assessment, neither of which you have sought. More importantly, it has been noted and documented as an attempt to interfere with your mother's legal standing as executor. That documentation is now part of this file." Chukwemeka's hands were flat on the table, very flat, like a man pressing something down. He said, "I was protecting the family." Kwame spoke for the first time. He said quietly, with the particular calm of someone who has decided that what he is about to say will be said once and not repeated. "Your mother was sitting on a road. She had been sitting on a road for 3 days. Before that, she had been sleeping in a church hall. You put her on that road. You are the eldest child of a woman who worked before dawn every day of your childhood to pay for everything you have, and you are sitting here, in this room, telling a lawyer that you were protecting the family." His voice was even, not raised, not aggressive, the way a river is even, steady and moving and not requiring anything from you except to be in its presence. He said, "I don't know you. You don't know me, but I know your mother. I have watched your mother shell ground nuts and cook soup and fold laundry and sit in a courtyard and answer the phone quietly because the man she found a son for asked her to. I have watched her carry something she has been carrying for 22 years without once asking anyone else to carry it with her. I have watched her give something back to two people who had lost things that could not be recovered. And I am telling you, as the man whose house she is in, as the man who opened a gate when she had nowhere to go, what you did to her will not stand. Not the road, not the will, not the competency filing, not any of it. He said, she is going home, the home your father intended for her and for the children of this city. And you are going to let that happen. Chukwuemeka stared at him. Something in his face, the calculation, the flatness, the practiced management of his expression, cracked, just slightly, just a hairline fracture, like concrete after the first frost. He looked at his mother. She was looking at him steadily, those dark eyes, that stillness. He looked at Ngozi, who was looking at the table, at her own hands, with the expression of someone who has finally heard the thing they have been needing to hear, and is grieving all at once every day they went without hearing it. He said, "Mama, He stopped. He tried again. He said, I told myself." He could not finish it. Adaisi said, very quietly, "I know what you told yourself." He looked up. She said, "You told yourself that I was old, that I needed to be managed, that what I needed was different from what I wanted. You told yourself that what your father wanted for his house was impractical, and that you knew better. You told yourself these things until you believed them. And then when the believing ran out, you put me in a car." The room was very still. She said, "I am not going to tell you that I forgive you today, Chukwuemeka, because forgiveness is not something you can give to someone before they understand what they are being forgiven for, and I don't think you understand yet. I think you are beginning to understand. I think this room today is the beginning of that understanding. And so I am going to tell you this instead. I will not close the door. There is a door between us, and I will not close it. But you are going to have to walk through it on your own, and you are going to have to come through it changed." He pressed his lips together. He nodded once. Philip said, "Then I believe we can proceed." He picked up the phone and said to his assistant, "You can send in the process server." Chukwuemeka did not leave. He sat there while the process server entered and placed the probate filing in Philip's hands, and he sat there while Philip signed it, and he sat there in the kind of stillness that is not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of a man who has run out of the things he was using to keep himself in motion. 4 months later, the Enugu morning. The light came through the windows of the small apartment in a Hara layout. Rented, temporary, while the lawyers completed the probate and the estate was formally transferred. At the low morning angle that was Adaisy's favorite time of any day, the time when everything was still possible and the weight of what had happened had not yet settled fully back onto the shoulders and could be held a little more lightly. She was making tea. The apartment was not large, but it was hers. 2 rooms and a kitchen and a small courtyard with a guava tree that dropped fruit she didn't always catch in time, which she had decided to consider character rather than inconvenience. There was a small bookshelf she had built from planks and stacked cinder blocks, because this was how she had always made bookshelves, and there were photographs on top of it. One of Emeka, taken at a naming ceremony many years ago, his face wide open in the pleasure of the moment. One of her 3 children when they were small, Chukwuemeka with a too serious expression, Ngozi laughing, Tobechukwu looking at something just outside the frame, already oriented toward an elsewhere. And one new photograph taken by Kofi, Adaisy and Kwame sitting in his courtyard, each in their own chair, each holding a cup, not looking at each other or at the camera, but at the same point in the middle distance, with the particular settled quality of 2 people who have stopped needing to perform anything for each other. She liked that photograph very much. The kettle sang. There was a knock at the door. She said, "It is open." The door opened, and Ngozi came in. Ngozi in a simpler dress than the one she usually wore, flat shoes, no expensive handbag, her hair natural and pulled back. She was carrying something, a plastic container of fried plantain, golden and crisp, the smell of it filling the room immediately. She said, "I made them the way you used to make them. I don't know if I got it right." Adaisy said, "Sit down and I will tell you." Ngozi sat down at the small table. She opened the container. The steam rose. She watched her mother pour the tea, 2 cups without being asked, setting one in front of Ngozi with the precise naturalness of a woman who has been making tea for 2 for so long that it is beyond habit. It is simply how tea is made. Addie sat down. She took a piece of plantain. She chewed carefully, the way she did everything, with full attention, without rushing. She said, "Close. You have the sweetness right. The outside needs another 30 seconds. Ngozi said, "I'll remember." They ate together. After a while, Ngozi said, "Kofi sent pictures from the site visit, where the school will be built." Adaisy said, "I saw them. He sent them to me too. He's good." Ngozi said, "He takes photographs the way people who actually see things take photographs." "He is his father's son in some ways," Adaisy said. "He sees structure, proportion, where things fit." She paused. "And he is his mother's son in other ways." Ngozi was quiet for a moment. She said, "Are they Kofi and Papa Kwame? Is it?" "They talk every week," Adaisy said. "Sometimes twice. Kofi is going to Ghana in the summer. Kwame is going to go also for part of the time. They will visit Afua's mother, who is very old now and has been waiting to see what became of her grandson." She drank her tea. "Things are built slowly, Ngozi. The houses that last are built slowly." Ngozi nodded. A pause. Ngozi said, "Tobachukwu called me." Adaisy went still. Ngozi said, "He asked about you. He didn't ask me to. He didn't give me a message. He just asked how you were. I told him you were well. I told him you were making a school." Another pause. Adaisy said, "When he is ready, he can call me himself." Ngozi nodded again. Then she reached into her bag and put something on the table. A drawing, a child's drawing, done in the large uneven crayon strokes of a 5-year-old. The figures stiff and broad-smiled, the sun a yellow circle with lines coming off it in all directions. 2 large figures and 1 small figure. The small figure was holding the hand of one of the large figures. Under the picture, in an adult's hand, a translation had been written in pencil. "My auntie, and my grandmother, and me." Ngozi said, "From my daughter. She wanted you to have it." Adaisy looked at the drawing. She picked it up and held it with both hands, the way you hold something that is fragile and also very light. She said, "What is her name? I always forget." Ngozi said, "Ada." She said, "Ada." She looked at the drawing. "That's a good name." She put the drawing carefully against the wall, leaning it against the base of the bookshelf, below Emeka's photograph. She considered the arrangement. She moved it 1/2 inch to the right. She looked at it. She said, "Tell her grandmother is keeping it." 3 weeks later, Kwame drove Adaisy to the land. It was a morning in June, the first light of the rains beginning, the air wet and green and full of that particular freshness that comes to Enugu at the start of the rain season, when everything that has been waiting under the dry surface suddenly remembers what it knows how to do. They parked at the edge of the road that ran alongside the land where the family house had stood, the house that had been sold as part of the probate settlement to fund the school's construction, the house that had been Adaisy's home for 40 years, and that now existed only in photographs and in the specific texture of memory that certain places leave in the body. There was no house anymore. There was a cleared plot, level, with stakes and string marking the footprint of what was coming. There was a signboard, new, slightly crooked in the soft wet earth, with the name on it in large letters, Emeka Nwosu Memorial School, established by the Nwosu Family Trust, serving the children of Enugu, free of charge. Adaisy stood at the edge of the cleared land for a long time. The morning light was the kind that happens in the rain season. Not the sharp, clear light of the dry months, but a softer, more diffuse light, as if the sky were a white cloth stretched over the sun. Everything it touched looked slightly more itself than usual. The red earth, the young grass at the edges, the signboard. Kwame stood beside her and held out an envelope. The deed registered by the lawyers, her name on it as founding executor, Emeka's name as the naming donor. She took it. She held it the way she had held the drawing, with both hands, with the full weight of her attention. She looked at her name on the outside, Adaizi Grace Nwosu, in the formal typeface of legal documents, the kind of typeface that means a thing has been made permanent. Her lips pressed together, her jaw moved slightly. She breathed in through her nose once, carefully, in the way of someone managing something large and needing to take it in portions. She did not cry. She said, "Grace." He said, "Your middle name." She said, "Emika called me that. Only Emika called me that." She looked at the envelope. He said Grace was not something you had or didn't have. He said it was something you practiced until it became who you were. He was a very annoying man sometimes. She laughed. A short, genuine laugh, the kind that surprises the person doing it. He smiled. She felt the smile more than saw it. She said, "I am going to build the most beautiful school." He said, "I know. I am going to help you." She said, "I know." She held the envelope in both hands against her chest for a moment, her eyes on the land, on the signboard, on the stakes and the string and the red earth, and the idea of 200 children who did not yet know their names were already written somewhere in the intention of this place. Children who would come through a gate and sit in rooms that had been paid for by a woman who had never stopped believing that the dead can give the living things the living cannot give themselves. She said, "Go and get Kofi. Tell him to bring his camera." He said, "He's in the car." She said, "Of course he is." He walked back to the car. She heard the door, heard Kofi's voice, young and warm, and with the particular quality of a man who is beginning, slowly, to believe that where he is also where he belongs. She heard him take something from the back seat. She heard his steps on the earth coming toward her. She did not turn yet. She kept her eyes on the land, on Emika's name on the signboard, on the light. She said quietly, "To the morning, to the land, to the man whose name was on the sign. You see? I told you I would make sure they got it." The morning did not answer, but the light shifted slightly, the way light does when the clouds adjust and the sun finds a new angle, and the red earth and the green edges and the white signboard were briefly, precisely, illuminated. A daze stood in it. She let it fall on her. She had been on a road, not long ago, a road in the dark, with a broken bag and no destination, and children who had driven away without looking in the mirror. She had been on that road, and she had sat with the stillness of a woman who has given everything and has been given nothing back. But she had seen something there, in that darkness. She had seen that she was still standing, not triumphant, not defiant, simply still standing, still herself, still the woman who had carried the will under the mattress of another woman's room for 22 years because her husband had believed in something. Still the woman who had raised 3 children and buried a husband and worked in 4 languages in 12 countries and never once asked the universe to make things easier, only to make them true. Still the woman who had found, in the house of a stranger, a letter addressed to a name she recognized and had made, quietly, the kind of decision that only certain people make. The decision to use what you know not for your own protection, but for someone else's wholeness. That is the only measure that matters in the end. Not the houses, not the money, not who left and who stayed. The measure is this: when you were given a power that no one knew you had, what did you do with it? Adesi Grace Nwosu looked at the land where the school would be. She had her answer. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next